This is the May 9th meeting of the Raleigh Conservation Commission. This meeting is hereby called to order under the authority of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, Town of Raleigh Wetlands Protection Bylaw, and the Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Bylaw. Notice is given that both a video and audio recording will be made of this meeting. The agent will now call the roll for attendance.
Thank you. Arthur Page.
Here.
Kurt Turner. Bob Garner. Here. Judy Keys. Yes. Dan Shinnick. Here. Sam Strife. Here. Howard Vogel is absent. Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum present.
Okay. Well, that will bring us to our first, which would be payroll and or vendor bills, which I think there is some.
We have a little bit of both. So if I may start off with a request for approval of the payroll. And while that's going around, I have our detailed hours sheet. Request for reimbursement on cell phone allowance. Mr. Chairman, here's the backup invoice on that.
Hi, Judy.
And this is the first submittal for reimbursement for Horsley Witten on the work they've done up to this point.
Check in.
Oh, yeah. Yep. It was on deposit, so funds are readily available to be drawn from. And Mr. Chairman, for your review, there's the backup invoice that verified that the
Does he know that?
No.
tasks expressed on there have been done.
Help yourself.
Thank you. Completes the payroll and the bill. Portion of the administrative items.
The next thing is the minutes, which we have 3 of them. And I know there were some questions on them, so we're going to be doing those one at a time. First one, did everybody get to look at the electronic filing for the April 17, 2018. Any questions, problems, or changes?
I move their approval.
Do you hear a second?
Second.
So moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Approved.
And that brings us to the earlier one, which is the October 22nd, 2013. Everybody have a chance to review those? Any questions, problems, or changes? We hear a motion to accept them as filed.
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, they're approved. Thank you very much.
Now, the December 3rd. Kurt, I think you had a couple questions on that.
And I think they've all
Well, we
been
had
addressed.
some changes.
They've been
Yeah.
changed. I saw the changes. So, anybody have any problems, questions, or anything with the changes made on the December 3rd, 2013? We hear a motion to accept.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
Thank you. Approved. Appreciate it.
The next item is a review request of Bitterroot LLC to cross Dodge Road Reservation Conservation Area to access a budding private parcel. I'll turn this over to Brent.
Okay.
I was made aware of this the other day, and it seemed normal.
Okay, so just for orientation purposes, thanks to a 1995-96 map produced by the Girl Scout Council, this shows Weathersfield Street. This was a detail that had a lot of their tent platforms, camp buildings, but for purposes of discussion, it's one of the few things that shows the private parcel here, which we've been calling the Apple Orchard because it has a slightly longer Realty Trust Corporation, and it doesn't have an official address per se. The driveway to Ed Moran's farm and farmhouse is called Taylor Lane because it crosses Taylor Brook, and so it only has an address of being off Taylor Lane. The request is that when the Girl Scouts assembled the parcel, which was made up of another 180 acres heading in the direction, let's see, Batchelder Brook is down here, Taylor Brook's up there, so sort of going the southwest, you head over towards Haverhill Street. The historic Homestead Farm Road called Smith Lane went across this small section of the private parcel. So when the Girl Scout Council bought the property, they couldn't go over private property that wasn't there, so they rerouted the dirt road that we call Smith Lane. We've now called it the Smith Lane Trail because we blocked off vehicle access except for emergency uses in that area. The request is for the for Bitterroot, who has the property under agreement along with Mr. Moran's farm, is to use the Smith Lane Woods Road to come out to the ball field and then go in with a piece of equipment which is able to navigate the old Woods Road here, which is substantially clear. In doing reconnaissance, so the purpose, the background purpose is that when you file for an open space residential development with the planning board, you're required to give them what's called a yield plan, which shows what conventional zoning would allow you to subdivide and make up lots, even if you are not intending to build anything on certain portions of the property. You still need to show what conventional zoning would technically allow you to do. That starts as the basis for a discussion about how many smaller size clustered lots you can
The Bitterroot has expressed the interest that they wish to donate this parcel to the town as open space. So on a yield plan, it could have conventionally about 10 lots on it with a cul-de-sac road going down here and then lots, basically 5 lots on either side. One of the ways the planning board verifies that where you're showing lots could actually be built upon is to request that you provide soil evaluation information. And so in my reconnaissance of the lot, and I'm going to switch over to pictures. So here's the historic route of what had been called Smith Lane. It's pretty well defined, it's grassed, it's open, had a few down trees across it, but other than that it was pretty open. At various places along the road were some really large pits, much larger than what I'm used to seeing for soil evaluation holes that just weren't filled in. I realize you can't get the scale here, so let's see if the next picture gives us any better scale. This is 8 to 10 feet deep, and it's roughly 12 to 16 feet in diameter. Commissioner Turner believes that he heard tales in the early days when he used to assist the ranger on the property and get firewood, that he was told that there may have been military exercises conducted on the property somewhere around the Korean War conflict, and that these may have been dug for some type of training exercises. But they're large, they're significant depressions. There was 5 of them identified along this section, and they had the spoils piles right next to them. So I initiated a conversation with Bitterroot and asked them if there was any way that when they came in, if they could do soil evaluations in those previously disturbed spots and then fill them back in to get rid of the liability. If this property is given to town, it would remove the liability of these large, open, fairly steeply sided and deep pits, as well as move these hummocks of spoils and restore the original surface topography. So there were 5 of them that were readily accessible. This is the only one. It's right on the edge where the property changes from being a nice dense grove of eastern white pines. It transitions and goes into a more open shrubby area. It's actually marvelous woodcock habitat. But it also happens to be the only place where a couple of pine trees managed to take hold and were growing on there. That also demonstrates how long ago it was, because one of the pine trees was 5 inches in diameter. So again, possibly indicative of that we were talking 40 to 50 years that it had grown there. So that was the only place that live trees actually got uprooted in order to fill in these holes. And there's kind of a better picture of it. You can see how kind of sharp and deep they are by the deep shadows that are in it. So we thought this was going to occur after the commission's meeting. It didn't work out that way, so in conversations with the chair and vice chair, they got permission to go in, and here's the result of their efforts. The holes have been filled in. All the surrounding spoils pile has been put in place. Only the dead trees that happened to be in the way got knocked down in the course of them being able to maneuver the equipment. As I said, we were, I think, very fortunate in the fact that only, I think, a total of 3 live trees actually got displaced. But they took care. They used that historic route, that woods road. Didn't have to do any other further cutting or anything, and they leveled the topography, and they're going to go back in and broadcast seed in those areas.
Excellent.
So So in bringing up this topic, and here's a view, I wanted to show what the Woods Road looked like, to show you that there was very minimal disturbance after the fact, that there wasn't a lot of scarring or anything that took place. Their Caterpillar tracked equipment was relatively gentle, although I wouldn't want it to have gone across my toes. And there's just some minimal raking that needs to be done out there. So this brings up the topic that I wish to get the Commission's sense here, if they would support when Bitterroot files their open space residential plan application before the planning board. I would like to, in my opinion, this parcel, whoops, let me go back to this. I'll find it. There we go. This parcel, because it's got riverfront coming up from Taylor Brook and that wetland, kind of ponded wetland area down there, or emergent marsh area, I believe that the distribution of these pits that have now been used for soil evaluations, I would like to request that the Commission allow me to issue a letter of support to the Planning Board requesting a waiver that they have to conduct any more soil evaluations on this property in order to preserve the vegetative cover and not to disturb the landscape any further by having to do more soil evaluations. This should represent a good dispersal profile of what the soils are like across that parcel, and since it's destined to be open space, I believe that the least amount of surface disturbance, any other access to it would result in trees and bushes and shrubs having to be cut in order to get in there and access any of the other portions of this property. It slopes in that direction, so they'd have to go down slope. And I would like to know if the Commission would support that perspective in basically supporting their request to a waiver to not be required to conduct more soil
One
evaluations.
question though, what was the reports on the soils?
I don't know, they just did it.
Oh,
Just
okay.
did it yesterday.
But based on the reports.
Although the word was that they were excellent,
Okay. And similar,
and which I kind of
are they
guessed,
similar
apparently.
results? Well, that's good.
Apparently.
Yeah, that's good.
So they were all considered that they would be capable of demonstrating percolability and therefore the ability to cite a Title V septic system on them.
Right.
I kind of thought they
So
might.
if they're consistent, that would support you.
Right, right. Now, there is this area right here is where both sides of this property slope into. It corresponds to where our gate is, and that just seems to be an area that transitions down, so there probably is wet meadow or marshy area there which would have pushed things up to either side of it. But that's a relatively small percentage of the overall acreage of that lot.
Will their road go through this?
No, no. They are going to redo, they have to do a little adjustment. Well, I haven't seen the final plans, but I'm told there's a slight adjustment to the orientation of where the existing driveway
Taylor
is.
Road.
Taylor Lane, which has
Yeah.
been called in the past, but it was the Moran Farm driveway. That's going to be developed as the roadway to go into the project.
Is there no access to that parcel from Taylor Lane right now?
No, without doing
Well,
it.
there's a farm gate, and it's very, very shrubby and very grown in. It's an abandoned apple orchard, so it's predominantly buckthorn, honeysuckle with some bittersweet, and then you've got scattered old apple trees interspersed with also some scattered white pines.
I guess I'm a little confused. I understood you to say they're going to be, their present intent is to donate this to the town?
Yes,
Why do they need to do soil testing if they're going to donate?
because as I tried to
Have to do
explain,
with
with
the
the
yield
yield
plan?
plan, they have to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that there is the ability to actually develop that parcel, that where they show lots has the potential of lots being actually developed there.
They're going to be doing a development that has reduced lot size.
Compared to conventional zoning out there,
Conventional
yes.
zoning, and what they have to do is show how many lots there would be conventional, and then they do a plan saying with smaller lot sizes, we'll do this, roughly the same number of houses, but we'll give the rest of the property to conservation.
And that's one of the reasons why they also previously had filed the ANRAD with us to get the wetlands order of resource area delineation. Again, so that when they then showed their yield plan, they wouldn't be showing lots being put in where wetland resource areas are that they could not conventionally build anyway, so.
Any further questions? Any questions from the audience on this particular project? All right, do I hear?
I move to support the
Second?
plan board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. All right. The conservation restriction agenda item for 42 Newbury Road, the John Sullivan. Open
yeah.
space residential development. You may have seen, I produced a memo in
Yes.
regards to the first review of the baseline report. And so I'm going to be working with Mr. Sullivan's professional help in regards to giving them better guidance on what needs to be in that, as well as we're waiting for his counsel to respond to our town council's comments on the initial version of the CR document. So he's provided an email requesting a continuance.
Yes.
I would just like to express an opinion about the state's baseline documentation report. It goes on for 48 pages, detailed restrictions that are totally absurd in my perspective. The whole thing could probably have been done in 5 or 6 days.
Right. And which is exactly, Commissioner Turner, which is exactly why I'm going to work with them. Unfortunately, that was the only document I could quickly put my hands on as something. And yes, full recognition that that is the gold-plated standard of a baseline report, and probably excessively verbose, because like all state documents, it needs to basically cover everything, whether it's applicable or not to the situation you're dealing with.
Well, we've seen it before, and
So but that's exactly the reason why I'm going to work with his.
Do they know what meeting they want, or are they just going to continue it?
I would suggest just continue it to the next meeting. He felt, and it was expressed in possibly an earlier email, that he felt his counsel would at least be giving us a response on town council's comments on the written CR document. But I suspect that I will also have had an opportunity to do some interactions with them in regards to content of the baseline report. But yeah, we know these things usually take time, and the point is to start getting things going here.
Do we need a motion to continue this?
Yes, please.
Do I hear such a motion to continue the John Sullivan?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
And this would be, is it 529?
Right.
And I'm sorry, who moved in second?
I did.
Sam.
Judy, yep.
Excuse me.
this is continued, so if you wish to read from the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
I believe so. This brings us to 7:45, which is a continued stormwater management permit application for 180 Central Street. Map 24, parcel 39, lots 1 through 6, TST Realty LLC, owned by Eric Strife, care of Sam Strife. Proposed construction for 6 residential house lots, driveways, clearings, stormwater facilities, utilities associated with grading. Yes, you may.
Mr. Chairman, I'm recusing.
Thank you.
At this point, Mr. Chairman, this was the meeting that we hoped to have our peer reviewer present.
Right?
Which do we?
We do.
Could you introduce yourself?
I am Janet Bernardo. I'm a professional engineer with the Horsley Witten Group, and I have reviewed this project.
Thank you. And we are also hoping that the applicant and their professional engineering expertise is available and ready.
Yes, good evening. For the record, John Moran from the Moran Cameron Group. We're here tonight representing TST Realty LLC for the stormwater permit located at lots 1 through 6, Bennett Hill Road, Central Street, aka 180 Central Street.
So, if you may,
Please.
I was hoping that we would have the commission's peer reviewers start off and just kind of summarize. We've had 3 back and forths, I think. And so it might sound like a little bit of a ping pong game here, but we're going to have it here because not all of us in the public has not been present since we allowed a lot of the exchanges, since they have to do with engineering and technical details. We facilitate that going on outside the public venue, but now is the time for the public venue to actually have these types of interplays go back and forth so we can hopefully show the progress and the suggested design changes to bring the stormwater management system for 180 Central Street into compliance with both the Mass stormwater standards as well as the town of Raleigh's.
Great. Have I your pointer?
You absolutely
Really?
may.
That's a nice pointer you have there.
Yeah, that's a good
Okay, can everybody see me? I'm Janet Bernardo again, and I did the review for 180 Central Street. My initial letter is dated April 16, 2018. Basically, the applicant, as you may know, has this parcel with 6 lots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lots proposed, fronting on Benton Hill Road and Central Street. And each of these lots has their own individual septic system, but they also needed to deal with the stormwater management. And so the applicant has proposed various methods to deal with their stormwater. They included chambers, under subsurface recharge chambers for, this is lot 1. There was some little recharge chambers over here. And then there was infiltration basins, 3 infiltration basins, and then another 4th infiltration basin for this separate lot that's off of Central Street. One of our concerns to meet the stormwater standards, the Mass DEP stormwater standards, there's 10 standards, and the first is that there can be no erosion to wetland system. And so what we did is we asked the applicant to verify that as these systems were discharging off and overflowing, they would go into Bennett Hill Road or Central Street and go into the municipal system. So there's a catch basin and a drain manhole here, and there's another outlet up here. This point discharges into this wetland system, and this discharge goes down into a separate wetland system. So I wanted to make sure that they weren't adding a lot of flow to those pipes that are already discharging, but if you all of a sudden increase the flow, then you could have an erosion problem on, further downstream that we were trying to navigate. So, they were able to go and look at those discharge points, take some photographs, show that there was no erosion right now, and the proposed flow to those places was being reduced slightly. So you could make that assumption that since they're already at a discharge point, they will not be adding additional flow to it, and therefore there will not be an erosion problem. So standard 1, which is concerned about the erosion in the wetlands, is accepted as being in compliance. Standard 2 is making sure that they're not increasing the runoff from between pre-development conditions and post-development conditions. They needed to evaluate the 2-year storm, the 10-year storm, and the 100-year storm event. So for the 2 and the 10-year storm events, their infiltration systems were adequate, but the 100-year storm event, they were increasing. So I asked them to reevaluate that to make sure that they weren't having a flooding problem downstream. And they went back and they increased the sizes of their systems. I also asked them to make sure that their infiltration systems had adequate separation to groundwater. So that they need to have at least 2 feet, preferably 4 feet for Mass DEP. And if they didn't have enough separation, they couldn't consider it infiltration. They needed to consider it a detention system. So I also asked them to try to see if they could take any of the roof runoff, as they did for Lot 1, in having this subsurface infiltration system that just deals with the clean roof runoff. I asked them if they could do that on any of the other lots as well. They went back and they added an infiltration system for Lot 3, for the runoff for the subsurface for the Lot 3, and they increased their basins and they did additional soil testing at these 4 locations because the other testing had been on the properties but not right where the basins are. So with the stormwater basins, you really want to be in the basin to make sure where the groundwater is at and to say that they actually have the separation that is being required. So they found that the groundwater was higher than they expected. So this basin, make sure I'm telling you, this basin is now a detention basin.
Correct.
This basin is also a detention basin.
Correct.
This basin is infiltration, and this basin is infiltration.
Correct.
So these 2 have enough separation to groundwater, and the subsurface chamber for here and for here also has enough separation to groundwater. So that meant that they were meeting by increasing the system sizes, this basin and these basins increased a little bit. They were able to hold back enough so that the 100-year storm event is not increasing over pre-development conditions, and the 2 and the 10 are also not increasing. And they, so that meant standard 2. Standard 3 has to do with the recharge and meeting the recharge requirements by having 4 places that they're infiltrating still. They're meeting the recharge requirement. Standard 4 has to do with the water quality, and that means that they have to show that they're treating the water before it gets to an infiltration system and before it gets to the municipal system. They're making sure that the sediments and the pollutants that may be on the grasses and in the driveways, if this is a roadway system, because it's mainly lawn and rooftop, it's not as big of a concern for the pollutants. But when it's roadway runoff and you have the cars and the dirt and the sand and the salts that are on the roads, then you really want to make sure that you have a solid water quality treatment, and that's what the standard's about. However, it doesn't mean that they don't have to meet it just because it's their lawn. For the smaller chambers that are just taking roof runoff, they get to just take that roof runoff, they consider it clean, it goes into the ground. All good. The other ones need to have some kind of pre-treatment, which what they're proposing is that that there's vegetated, a long span of vegetated surface that will collect like basically the lawn. So the runoff from the driveway will go over the lawn, will get kind of caught up, the little bit of particles and sand and whatever will get stuck in the grass before it gets to the infiltration system and not clog the system. So we reviewed that, we agreed that they met that requirement for standard 4. and so that they're not increasing, they're meeting their total suspended solid removal rate of 80% with their infiltration systems and their detention systems. Standard 5 has to do with if it's considered a LUPL, which is
Land use.
land use. I'm like, what? Land use of the higher potential pollutant load, and this the residential homes is not considered having a land as a land use, like a gas station would be, a junkyard would be, but residential homes is not, so they don't have to deal with that requirement. That's standard. Standard 6 is if it's in a critical area, they're discharging to a vernal pool, or they're discharging to a water supply, drinking well. They're not in that standard. And by the way, the wetland in this area is over here, and their process, their whole development is outside the 100-foot buffer. So this is a stormwater, totally for a stormwater permit that you're looking at for. So standard 7 is a redevelopment requirement. This is not a redevelopment, so they don't have to deal with that. Standard 8 has to do with operation and maintenance, and we did go through that quite a bit, basically because each of these basins needs to have some kind of a maintenance system, and it's the homeowners, because these properties sit on residential lots, that will need to deal with that. So that's one of my bigger concerns, is to make sure that the future homeowners understand what these stormwater systems are, understand that they have to maintain them. It's similar in one sense to if they were maintaining their septic system, except if their septic system were to fail, they end up having a sewage problem that's unsightly, and they don't want that. Stormwater failing, what will happen is it will go into the municipal system, and the property owner might not care unless they happen to be considerably environmentally friendly individual. So trying to make sure that these new property owners are paying attention to these systems and making sure that they do maintain them in some regular manner. And that's not a difficult process, because it's mainly making sure that the area is maintained in some way, not filling it in, because that would definitely ruin the whole thing if they filled in the depressions, because they're just small areas. They need to remove any wooded debris and cut any saplings that might start growing through there. And they could do some landscaping around it, but we just want to make sure that the runoff from the driveways continues to run into these and doesn't go to the street. That's the goal. So making sure that there's some kind of a condition that the operation and maintenance plan that has been developed is provided to those homeowners, that they are aware that these exist, that they maybe have signed something and you have received it for your file, so that they can't come back in 10 years and say, I didn't even know it was there, nobody told me. Which, I hear that on my commission. So that's one of my suggested conditions for this commission, is to have something about the operation and maintenance for the future homeowners to be able to address that. And standard 9 has to do with erosion control. And I believe I saw a late email from you that you saw some additional comments about the erosion control that I missed. So I assume that the applicant will be addressing that in some manner as well. But basically, because this entire parcel is more than 1 acre of land disturbance, they will be required to file a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which we call SWIP. So the SWIP is basically to say there'll be erosion, we'll be paying attention, there'll be either siltation fences or straw wattles or straw hay bales or whatever is agreed upon, to make sure that erosion doesn't go off the property, doesn't go into somebody else's property, doesn't go into any wetlands, doesn't go into the street, doesn't get dragged onto the street with the trucks. That needs to be covered, and it's an like a living document. So when it's basically the contractor says, we've created this SWIP, this is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna contain our wetland, our erosion control, and we have signed off. EPA requires it under their Clean Water Act, and basically the governing body becomes the Conservation Commission because EPA is probably not driving around Raleigh making sure that people are meeting their SWIP requirements. So it comes under you guys for the most part, and so that's standard. And standard 10 is making sure that there's no illicit discharge going into any of these stormwater basins, making sure that people aren't taking their washing machines and putting them into this. And so that typically needs to be signed by the property owner. It's more an awareness thing for all property owners to understand that they're not supposed to tie anything besides stormwater into a stormwater system. And so it's suggested to be signed by the property owner, or the future property owners may be more appropriate. So that's standard 10, and that's kind of what we went through in my letter. The first one was April 16th. The applicant responded to that letter and provided some more documentation. I did a review of that in light of this hearing, trying to kind of move the process forward. I was able to send them an email on Thursday, maybe Thursday morning or Wednesday night, last week, saying, these are some of the things I saw, and can you respond to this relatively quickly? They turned that around, gave me a revised set of documents for Thursday night, and Friday I was able to review that and provide a letter to Brent that you received Friday night or Monday morning to be prepared for this hearing tonight. So I think there may have been a few other issues that Brent noticed, but I guess that's my story.
Great job.
Thank you.
Very understanding.
Oh, good. That's part of the goal.
Yes.
There you are. If you have any questions, or here's your.
Yeah, do you want to address
Yeah,
those?
John,
Yeah.
you could
Sure.
talk to us
So,
about.
I mean, pretty much Janet covered everything. So she had an initial review. During the process, we already knew that we were going to be doing soil testing out on the site. So the systems were revised, as she had stated, based on the soil test data. We did look at the possibility of putting roof runoff, using chambers for other roofs, say on lots 2, 4, and 5. The issue with that is lots 4 and 5, the septics are right in the front yard, so you don't really have any place to put these chambers because there's a setback requirement from the chambers to a septic system. And the backyards, as you can see, are graded off. They're garage unders, so the sloping terrain, you don't really have the space to put the chamber system. We did originally propose one on lot 2, and what we found out is when we were doing the drainage analysis, once the pond out in front of lot 2 was changed over from an infiltration basin to a detention pond, the chambers that we were looking at proposing really weren't doing anything. We could actually remove them from the equation, and they weren't mitigating runoff. We didn't need them for recharge because we had the 4 other systems. So we actually removed that item out of the drainage design because we no longer needed it. So we pretty much addressed all the other comments. As Janet had stated, on Thursday morning, I believe, the 4th, she had some minor comments. We were able to turn around a revised plan and submit that. I can go through the revisions. It was mostly detail work and a couple of issues with regards to operation and maintenance. And I've been in discussions with Brent over the last few days while he's been reviewing the information, and he did have a few comments. And I was able to actually revise the plans. I can go over that information now, if the commission would like.
Let's wait and see if we have questions.
Okay, so I won't cover that.
Well, let's at least let's talk about the erosion control detail. That's
Yep.
that's the.
So
and first off, the Raleigh Conservation Commission, from our experience, greatly prefers compost or bark mulch socks as opposed to straw wattle, especially in a project where you've got the whole the whole single-family lot under development. We find that they're more resilient, they're more durable, they respond to getting nicked, dragged, scraped a lot better than the straw wattle does. And usually they're also capable of being repositioned, where the straw wattle starts to decompose and lose its integrity of the straw, and then when you try to move it, it just ends shaking all out of the plastic netting, and you lose the body and the filtration capabilities
Right.
of it. And I'm not going to say anything more.
Do you have a dimension requirement for those?
Usually 9-inch. And to be honest with you, if we didn't have any declaration that there was going to be large stockpiling here, if there's large stockpiling, then we usually require that it be used in combination with the silt fence, so that we have the height of the silt fence then bolstered by the filtration capabilities of the sock being right in front of it where the ground is loosened up, just in case there's any infiltration from the ability of putting the skirt, embedding the skirt of the silt fence, just as a point.
So for the erosion control that was proposed on the plant, on the design, we actually proposed silt sock. We weren't using hay wattles, as we are aware of what the commission usually likes in Rowley. What we did do is, on the original design, we had hay bales. We had a note on the plan that for stockpile areas, we'd surround them with hay bales. And the reason we did that was there were no wetlands around the area. Hay bales are easier to put in than silt fence, and it'll work for the size of the stockpile areas that we'd need on this project. Brent had called me and said, you know what, we really don't like hay bales. So I said, that's fine. So what we did is we modified the plan. I have the revised plan tonight. We removed the hay bales. Reference, what it is under, not that page, oh, they're on here. Under the erosion and sediment control, there's a section in there, one of the notes talks about stockpiling, and it references hay bales. So what we did is we revised that note, eliminated hay bales, added silt fence, and then we added a silt fence detail to sheet 3, and we removed the hay bale detail. The other thing that Brent had requested is the silt sock detail actually just showed the two socks kind of butted from one onto the other. They should really be overlapped, 18 inches. So
Well, side by side, as opposed to going up and over.
Right. So what we did is we revised the detail to show that you would, based on the direction of flow, you would overlap behind the first row with the second row of silt sock when you started at least 18 inches. And we revised the plan to reflect that. So with regards to the erosion controls, I think we've addressed the issues that were on that plan. Brent also noticed that, you may recall the original design, it was a 2-sheet set. So there were a lot of notes on sheet 1 that referenced to things on sheet 2, and it said sheet 2 of 2.
Yeah.
Well, that obviously gets confusing when all of a sudden you add a sheet 3. So we actually went in and revised the plan so it says sheet 2 of 3, so it references the correct page. The other note was the wetlands located to the northwest of Lot 1. That wetland resource area was actually delineated by DeRosa Environmental. So Brent pointed out that we had the wrong reference on the wetland note on sheet 1. So we revised that to show that it was DeRosa Environmental, and they actually did that on March 26th of 2018. So we added that note to the sheet. And one other issue Brent had brought up last week on the inspection forms for the BMPs, the best management practices, out in the front of these lots. And really, you got 3 best management practices going on around here. You've got the chambers for the roof runoff. Actually, you got 4. You got the chambers for the roof runoff, you got the detention ponds, you got the infiltration basins, and then you've got, pretty much what we called, because that's the way they refer to it.
Vegetated filter strip.
Yeah, we actually call it a pre-treatment area because it didn't meet the exact definition of the vegetated filter strip. So it's really just the lawn areas. As Janet had explained, that definitely provides treatment coming off a residential driveway. So Brent wanted a O&M checklist form that had a little more detail on it. That way it would be easier for the homeowner, to do inspections, or anyone. So we modified our original checklist form to be more detailed, almost more like a commercial site. But it just really references whatever's on those lots. So what we did is we created one for every lot, one for lot 1, one for lot 2. It lists what's on the property and what they need to be looking for and what they need to do if they find an issue. So we actually revised those. I brought them tonight. I actually emailed them over to Brent. But, we just got the information. Brent was fortunate enough to be able to review this earlier in the week, so, we revised that.
He's being very
information.
charitable. What he really should be saying is Brent should be sorry that he tortured John all throughout today by coming up with some last minute things as I finally, got various points of sedate office, not phone ringing or whatever, and I could sit and look and concentrate and look at things. So we'll be honest about it. I'm willing to say I was a little bit slow.
You gave those operation maintenance information last week. You were fine. That was a good.
So, right now, that was pretty much where we're at this point with the application.
Before I open it to questions to the public and to the board, did you have anything else to add to?
Well, yeah, because I did just complete a memo to the commission, which was distributed rather last minute, and there were a couple of things that I just want to touch base with John right now, and that is I found that I had made an earlier note about having abutters identified on the other side of Central and Bennett Hill, because we had a lot of interest, and also that helps us know where we have certain folks, what their proximity is to the project. So if you don't mind making a further revision to the plan sheet, because you didn't know about this, and I just came up with it. So that's... So on my sheet, that is point number 4. Point number 7, which I thought of a little later on, sheet 3 of 3 about the silt sack, is it doesn't mention, and my understanding is you can get at least 3 different meshes.
Correct.
Or whatever, and so I would like it specified that we get the medium and not have them use the coarse. I want, a smaller grain size captured by it. I don't think there's any reason to go for the finest, because I don't believe we've got any clays to deal with here. So
What is that, mostly sand?
No, it's a sandy loam.
Yeah,
Sandy loam.
so. And then a question, and that is that also on number 8, sheet 3 of 3, when the commission has specified entrance-exit pads, we've usually expressed it as 2 to 3 inch minus, and you have 2 to 4 inch. We've had some circumstances where they've had 3-inch material, and they've had problems with it being very loose, and it was okay for trucks and double axle vehicles. But as soon as they started going on with regular trucks or whatever, it started slipping, and I didn't know if it would make any difference to change that size so that it wasn't such the large material or not. I was just thinking that there's probably a lot more pickup trucks or whatever going in here than there will be dump trucks.
Yeah, and I was able to review this memo that Brent put together before the hearing, and with regards to adding the abutters' names, obviously that's not an issue. The silt sack, changing it over to medium instead of coarse, that's fine. And
I don't think it says anything at all, so I'd like it to specify something.
That's fine, we can add that. And changing it from 2 to 4 to 2 to 3 inch minus, that's fine. We'd have no problem if the commission would, if they moved to approve, if they were willing to condition that, we can modify the plan. As I had stated before, pretty much all of Brent's other questions have already been revised on the plan. So we could have this plan revised and have it back into the commission tomorrow.
Yeah, okay. Other than that, my suggestions for some of the comment was, first off, I wanted to have those inspection sheets be very self-contained, because I figured it was probably going to be a real stretch with property owners that if we get them to keep one piece of paper and that piece of paper guides them when they actually go out and look at their detention area or look at their subsurface chamber, this gives you the criteria that you're being asked to look at. And it gives you a reference as to what is it that you're to be alert for here and to make sure has happened. Again, just to make it, quote unquote, keep it simple, stupid, kind of, for a piece of paper. The commission in the past has conditioned projects such as this, so there's ongoing conditions requiring maintenance. We've also used a strategy in the past when we know lots are going to be sold to other final occupant, that on the wetland side of things, we've required an affidavit be prepared that the buyer acknowledges that they know about no disturbance areas or something like that. I think we can use a similar strategy with the idea here that we know these lots will be sold, and we just require an affidavit that acknowledges that the buyer has been given the operations and maintenance and the inspection sheet, and acknowledges that they've been made aware that this is their ongoing commitment to operating the stormwater management system.
Especially with the locale of these houses, because anything that fails is going to immediately go into this.
Well, it's going to become a municipal problem,
Right.
and in us observing due diligence and proper responsibility, stormwater needs to be the responsibility of the property that it's generated on, not shunted and given to the municipality to have to expend all broad general taxpayer money to deal with an issue that should be specific to one property. And these are very low-tech type things, so this isn't really that we're somehow cost-shifting government responsibility onto these private property owners. We are not doing that in this instance, so I will make that editorial comment.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Brent's exactly right. Because of the fact that residential owners will be responsible for the maintenance, we really tried to make the systems to mitigate the drainage as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Because it's always, even with commercial sites, maintenance is one of the biggest issues. So if you can make it easy, then they're more likely to maintain it.
Other than abandoning a property, I don't know how else you could actually fault in something like that.
Well, and the other issue is
filling would do it.
the stormwater systems are right out in front.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're back behind the lots. I mean, everyone's going to see them. The majority of them above ground. So if there is an issue, you're going to notice it. If they start holding water.
How are we going to know that these things have been given to the property owners?
As I said, an
We're gonna put it
affidavit.
in it.
Are we going to get copies of that? Is that
Yeah,
part of
well, that's the
required
whole,
as part of the conditions?
Yeah, that's the whole requirement, that an affidavit that has their signature attesting to the fact that they've been informed of the responsibilities and the existence. And the final thing is the other strategy that we've adopted. Instead of just inspecting the installed erosion control, we now inspect the project for limit of work, make sure that the limit of work, so that we know that clearing does not exceed what was configured and planned on, because we know that then changes the stormwater calculations and can make your sizing of these basins null and void if they clean an excessive amount of square footage that was counted on being left in undisturbed natural vegetation. Other than that, I made the comment that I'm also going to provide some of the commentary here that involve the municipal stormwater drainage system on Central Street. I'm going to provide copies of this to alert the highway department so they can conduct inspections and do whatever is in the town's best interest at looking at any particular maintenance issues here. And I think there were some other folks that had some wish to ask the commission some questions about this.
All right,
I've got
I'm
another
gonna have the board ask first, and then we go to the public. Go ahead, Kurt.
How, would it make any sense to have this affidavit recorded? The reason I say that is because the buyer turns the property over and sells it within a year. There's no, you know, if the original affidavit is recorded, that puts them on legal notice that this condition continues to apply.
Well, our certificate of completion is going to have a specific section of ongoing conditions, and that is recorded just by the basic requirements of the permit. So there will be recordation that has the ongoing conditions, which specifically calls out the property owner's responsibility for maintenance of the stormwater drainage system, as well as maintaining its integrity, functionality, and the periodic maintenance requirements that are expressed.
My impression is that certificates of condition frequently arrive on our table sometimes years after the fact. So I'm not sure that provides the kind of notice to subsequent property owners that I'm concerned about.
Well, more than likely, the scenario is usually that when you have a permit, which is viewed as a liability for the construction activities, that once the developer, property owner, responsible party completes their requirements in the development phase, and then they go to sell the property, they may seek partial certificates of completion for the individual lots as this progresses, with us also having the requirement for an affidavit to whoever the buyer of the property is while this permit is in full force and effect. There's going to be two different scenarios here that will result in direct communications to the potential buyer, as well as the recordation.
But didn't that just not happen over on Glen Street? There was a purchase of a property over there that had some delineated no cut, no disturbs with granite bounds. That should have been recorded, and presumably wasn't.
No, it was.
He still never knew about it.
Well, you can only do so much. To be honest with you, though, we had not gone to the extent that we now prepare a separate attachment which has the full written requirements of the ongoing conditions, is now included as an attachment sheet to the certificate of compliance. I know what you're saying, but to be honest with you, the issue on that property was the fact that the monumentation was indistinct, lacked any type of signage alerting to what the concrete post meant. And we've adopted the strategy now of requiring the painted aluminum signage with English verbiage on it that says it's a restricted area. That lot was closed out prior to us getting more detailed and specificity into our completion project. But still, at the end of the day, when I was serving on the Haverhill Conservation Commission, we had a property owner who we ended up bringing into us, who specifically went out in their backyard, pulled out all the posts that said, contact the Haverhill Conservation Commission. This is a no-cut, no-disturbance area. And they stockpiled them in their basement and then proceeded to cut and clear the no-cut area. So we could do all sorts of things. We could build the marginal line.
Right. No, I think to Kurt's point, and I'm sympathetic, is that the more instruments we have that are going to preserve the need for the O&M and the illicit discharge notifications, in perpetuity, I think that is a benefit that I am sympathetic
I've
to.
got another question related to that, and that is, as part of the certificate of completion, don't we also require an as-built plan?
Yes.
Again, those things come in years after the fact very often.
Well,
and I'm just suggesting that maybe we ought to require,
In this particular
This
instance where you have
particular
occupied
affidavit.
dwellings, it cannot be years after the fact unless TST decides they want to hold on to that for the eventual turning it into a nunnery or something, and they decide not to sell the dwelling. They will need to seek an occupancy permit at some point in time. The building inspector will come to me and he will ask me, is there any outstanding permit issues here that might cause me to have you say, no, don't issue the occupancy permit? And the lack of a certificate of completion will be one of those topics that I would immediately think of and say, oh, yep, we got a problem here. And so we've got some mechanisms in place that are not going to let this permit hang out there for multiple years, that are put together in the most legally respectful manner we can, that result in direct communications to the potential buyer, and also direct communications via recording at the Registry of Deeds with full text of the ongoing conditions being displayed for public review and title research. So
Everything that's feasible is done.
everything that's feasible. In this particular instance, we don't have no cut, no disturbance areas that we can put the nice signage on, because this isn't regulated wetland resource areas. But we also, as has been said, we have stormwater features that are right in the person's front yard. If they do not function, it is going to become very evident relatively quickly. They will either have ice going across their driveways, they will have discharge to the street, whereupon the highway department will be investigating why there's issues coming from these lots, and we could then initiate conversations with the property owner as to why they may not have been maintaining things correctly. I can't say that someone might not be able to throw a monkey wrench into the system here, but I think in terms of our logical, rational, and respectful of property rights strategies, I think we have a full-fledged suite of protections put in place that result in both education and information and acknowledgement backed up by legal recording, which then shows the justification for if the commission is called upon to possibly take enforcement action, which we always have the opportunity to do that. If things do not fail on the reasonable scale, the commission does have the ability to take enforcement action and to fine under this bylaw for failure to properly maintain and keep the functioning of their stormwater system.
And what about the actual text of the operation and maintenance conditions? Where is that actually recorded? Is it a manual that is left on the kitchen counter of each one of these residences?
There's not much. Just don't pile all your leaves and pus manure and everything in the low areas.
Yeah, it's
You
just
have to really,
it's
really
just a
try.
few pages. Plus, we've also worked. I'll distribute the inspection sheets to you. We've worked to make the inspection sheet be basically self-fulfilling, and it could technically be the crux, be an operations manual all by itself, really. It tells you exactly what's on your lot, what the criteria is that you need to be doing, how frequently you need to inspect it, and what it is you're to be looking for. And then it has boxes where you can indicate when you did something, who it is that...
And when the homeowner loses that original, where do they get a
Get
copy?
it right from us.
From us? Okay. We'll have it, okay.
Yeah, it will be in our files.
Recorded.
Can you put it online?
We can't put much online.
Just a check.
I mean, it's not really that hard to come
Instructions?
down here and get it.
No,
Just
would there be a
reason.
reason to have... I don't...
I mean,
Yeah,
it's about overkill.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see making this part of the recordation of the permit. I'm not sure that that's going to gain anything. That's not...
Any other questions
And
from
that
the board?
definitely isn't the first place I'd go looking for it either.
Is the use of chemicals on the lawns an issue?
We're not in a well zone.
I didn't.
Do they
I
need
didn't.
to be alerted to that?
Well, I didn't bring that forth because the commission's normal reason for having any type of guidance on the use of chemicals, be it fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides, the commission's usual impetus for that is that we have regulated wetlands plant community, which has a plant community which does not react well to, say, the use of herbicides or fertilizers, whereupon, now, we can certainly put in the use of low nitrogen and organic type fertilizers for lawn maintenance. This doesn't drain into outstanding resource waters. There aren't any, to our knowledge, certainly aren't any public drinking water wells or aquifer supply areas anywhere near this project, so we wouldn't normally, say, prohibit the use of rock salt. We usually only do that in response to there being a drinking water supply, zone 2, something like that being nearby, or a vernal pool. None of those triggers that normally result in us adopting those types of requirements. But again, the lawn fertilizer requiring low nitrogen, slow to release is a good beneficial thing, and it doesn't impact your ability to maintain a nice green lawn.
Anybody else have a question? Okay, from the audience, question in regards to
I could just make
stormwater
one
management?
comment about the lawn fertilizer. We have no problem if the commission wants to make a recommendation, but I don't think, as Brent had stated, I don't think you can condition it, because you're within it, you're not within an area that's a zone 2.
We'd have to do it for the rest of the town, and I don't
Exactly.
really feel like tackling that. So,
Right. So again, we have no problem if it was a recommendation.
Go ahead, we had a question from the audience in regards to the
I just had
stormwater.
one quick question, and I will say that everyone here tonight has done a fabulous job. This property has not perked, as we know, for many, many years, and obviously as neighbors, and I'm a neighbor across the street from one of them, I think you've all done a great, great job on not only presenting this, but also to the public, keeping us involved, etc. I think, as I kind of understand, is when we get to these basins, we've talked very closely about where the owner is going to have an obligation. I guess the concern is does the ConCom need us to complain, or if we have a problem, or is it just something that on a routine basis this will be looked at, I guess is my big, are you going to be watchful about this? Or is it something, and I know it's a very difficult question. Obviously, if we know we have a problem.
Which is why I said about respectful of private property rights, so yes.
Right, yes.
So in that context, we believe we are filling the requirement
Yes.
of requiring and validating full informational download to the folks who bear the responsibility for maintaining. We put in the perpetual ongoing conditions that they have that obligation, which, so if they do any type of title search, anything else like that, it's there and always provides then a checking point, plus our files that we keep with the as-built plans will always have that information there. The reality is, yes, again, you can be a property owner and and I have the same thing. I suffer from some deferred maintenance on the siding of my house. But it is not an environmental issue at this point in time, so conceivably that can happen. So one of the other hard things it's not a hard thing. So one of the things to understand with environmental regulations, which the Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Bylaw is an environmental regulation, is that usually in order to take action, we need definitive concrete proof that there is in fact a violation. So
That
the
something's happened.
unfortunate thing is that, say it's allowed to become overgrown, and there's a few, say they planted roses of Sharon on their property. For whatever reason, I've got roses of Sharon, and they seem to be extremely fertile and fecund, and they keep growing all sorts of places. Now, you don't really want woody stem vegetation to be growing in your basin. So say they start having some shrubs or whatever, get a foothold and growing in their basin. We cannot basically take action on something like that until such time as there is definitive proof that the basin
across
is
the
not,
street.
yes, going out into the
Okay.
street.
That's when the highway would usually
Okay.
say.
The
"You've got
basin
problems," or
embankment,
a
getting
neighbor.
the Grand Canyon cut through it, an actual definitive failure.
Right.
I mean,
And obviously, the way they've constructed it, that's not supposed to happen.
well, right, and that is also the reason why we inspect the project for completion, is that we'll inspect to see that they're fully vegetated, that we don't just, oh, great, you hydroseeded it and walk away. No, we look for 85 to 90% germination of the grass, so that there aren't big bare spots, so that we know that it's going to have vegetative cover, because that is the most resilient thing that will be on this property, that's resistant to the forces of erosion, and also is part of the component to slow things down, to use the blades of grass to filter and to take up some of the pollutants and stuff.
Great, thank you.
So I hope I wasn't
Answer
too
that. No,
wordy
no,
about it, but
no.
I'm just, that's.
Absolutely perfect.
If I could just add to that, the neighbors are often our best eyes and ears. However, I would say that there's probably not another house on your street that has these kind of stringencies against them.
You have a question?
I have kind of a multi-thing. Elizabeth Tucker, 186 Central Street. It looks like, whether you consider neighbors or not, you're not looking at any impact on where my property sits in relationship to the properties on Bennett Hill Road. The property, the one on Central Street, I could care less about. That's my driveway. I live 600 feet back. My house actually sits closer to Bennett Hill Road than it does. It's sloped down from this property. I have pasture back there, I have animals back there. My biggest concern also is flooding with lack of, the amount of trees that are gonna be needed to take down. I've already had a flood from hydro, coming up from the water table.
Before this construction. Right.
But now with all this construction and removing
That's
vegetation.
why we had two professional organizations come in and.
Right,
go
but you're
through it.
looking at what stormwater is going into the town municipal thing. You're not looking at it towards my property.
Oh, no, au contraire. They
It doesn't go
specifically
there.
were looking at any place on this project where stormwater
Okay, so I
may
didn't-
possibly exit
Part of your-
the limits of this property. And the reason your property wasn't discussed was because, based on the analysis of where the clearing is and the elevational information given to us by their survey crew, that there isn't any clear developed portion of this project that is going to be sending stormwater towards your property.
Well, that's good to know. Even though I'm, downhill from
Well,
it.
right, you're significantly downhill.
Yeah, talk about putting me in a damn
And just
fish pond.
Yeah, just so you know, that is one of the things I looked at, and that's one reason I went back and said, okay, tell me where the water is going if the system fails, or if the municipal system and the catch basins in the street are clogged, what happens to this runoff? And they were able to say how that it flows along the gutter until it gets to the wetland crossing. But the idea is that they're not increasing the runoff to the municipal system, and they're not increasing the runoff off their property at all. I mean, the municipal system was the target, but that's the first point off of their property. So if they're not getting off their property, they're not getting to your property either. So I did look at that.
Yeah, because I do have wetlands back there too, which I care about
Yeah.
as an environmental type person. And I also, as I said, I have animals and I have pasture back there. I
Yeah.
don't need, chemical runoff, I don't need the water filling my basement
Right,
again.
you should not get it. It should not be coming. You're across.
No,
She's
can I
actually
just point out where my house is?
She's this lot right here.
Right, but no, yeah. No, my lot may be there, but.
Oh, but your house is
Pointer-
really behind the wetlands.
Where's that
Here's the
pointer?
pointer.
There you go.
My house sits here.
Oh, yeah, they have very little runoff to that
Very
point.
little.
Very
This is
little.
all hill.
Yeah.
This is
we're
all
not-
sloped.
The only runoff going to there is that one lot, and that has the subsurface system. Most of it is
This
going
is the lot
towards
that's-
the intersection. The majority of that property goes towards Central Street.
And I know she's got issues, but she's not here to talk about it.
Yeah,
so.
and only that lot up the top. So there's the divide, and they can show you the watershed divide, but most of it is going towards the Central Street intersection.
Correct. And my other concern is it already floods on Central Street terribly.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
It's a pond there every time it rains, and
Yeah.
in front of.
And they're not gonna
the
fix
graphic
the
design
pond.
place.
They're not.
It's not the pond.
They're not
It's-
charged with fixing it. They're charged with not making it.
Contributing it, not contributing to it.
Contributing.
Could I just ask a follow-up question to that? Because on page 2, you did say that a 100-year storm would be a problem, substantially.
And then they
increased.
changed their design.
I thought.
That's
they
why
said
she
that.
changed it.
Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Yes, Dick Malin, 101 Benny Hill Road.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Dick, former chairman of the Conservation Commission.
Bring back old times.
Yes, you have a question?
Yes, Mary Behringer, 115 Bennett Hill Road. So on lot 4, that driveway looks like it's at a significant grade, and our driveway goes downhill directly across the street from that. You two experts, right? We're not going to get runoff from that driveway down our driveway.
I believe, Brent, that was one of the first things we went over on the first meeting.
Well, again, this is all set up to keep their stormwater within the confines of
Their
their
land.
private parcel and not even enter the public's right-of-way,
So we
and
didn't-
therefore not go across the paved public way and go onto the other side. So,
Can I just add something? That was one of the driveways that I did think about quite a bit. So the applicant has graded this driveway so that it will pitch down towards here, but towards this property on the next
The
side.
next basin.
But if the paver doesn't pave it properly, they could easily have it draining directly to the street. It's hard to super elevate a driveway so significantly, but it may be beneficial to add a condition that this particular driveway is graded as shown on this plan, and therefore, if the paver paves it incorrectly, they have to go back and fix it, because you don't want it to. I mean, it would be quick. In a second, the pavers are out there and they make everything just perfect for them. But you really need to be draining off onto the site, which is how it's shown. But it's having it shown on a piece of paper and having it happen in reality doesn't always have the same thing. So that's the condition that you really want to make sure happens.
Good point.
As I think with all of the driveways along there, not
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
I guess what
all
I'm
of the
thinking, because it
driveways.
is all downhill.
That one happens to
And-
be the steepest.
Yes,
The other
yes.
ones are most likely will just fall that way.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you get a 200-foot, 200-year event or a 300-year event, you're gonna get water,
Yeah, we are.
and so am I.
Well, the other issue too, I'd just like to bring up, that driveway is super elevated, but the hydro model is designed so that, obviously you can't get every portion of that driveway off into the lawn. So the model does show that we do have some runoff from that driveway. So I don't want people to think that, oh, I'm seeing water coming off the driveway into the street, therefore it doesn't comply. But the analysis did show that we do have some water that goes out beyond into the right-of-way, but the street drainage system can handle it. And the, the design,
Well, I don't
In
think
the
the street
wintertime?
drainage system can handle what we have right now.
It doesn't.
well, based on the pre-developed conditions, we're not throwing any more water out into the street drainage system than
So it
what's
should be
there.
better after it's done.
We're actually doing less because, as you can see, we are pushing a lot of that water, keeping it on our property, mitigating it through all these drainage basins.
But as is, it's dirt and it's ground that absorbs the majority of it. Now we
Now we
have
have pavement
pavements, etc., that's going to divert it elsewhere.
and turn it into a sheet of ice in the winter.
And
You have a question?
Yeah, in relative to this driveway discussion, I wanted to hear how much, I would have a similar concern around the next driveway up, the one right in the middle.
Number 3?
Yeah, number 3. I'm just wondering, I mean, in order to keep that from not being a very steep grade, I mean, there's going to be a tremendous amount of dirt removed, it seems to me. Is that the plan? I mean,
Yeah.
how much, and related to that, somewhat indirectly related to the whole stormwater management discussion, particularly during the building process, how much soil and dirt do you guys plan on moving from this hill or redistributing? Can you guys give me a feel? I mean, is it
no, we haven't
a couple
run
hundred
any
yards?
numbers.
Is it, I mean,
To answer your first question, at the driveway, you're looking at about a 6-foot cut in that location.
how much?
6 feet, which isn't a lot.
From where to where?
Not too bad.
This grade right now is around elevation 65, and we're gonna be around elevation 59 with the garage.
I don't believe it.
I'll-
I'm sorry, I don't believe it. I
That's
mean,
what-
you go up it's a very steep
No, from
grade.
the street to the driveway, to the top.
From the street to the top of that,
No, the existing grade, right here, that's a 66 contour right there.
yeah.
Yeah.
The garage floor is 59. So there's a 7-foot cut on the back side of the house. There's a 6-foot cut on the front side of the
So
garage
is there like a
face.
retaining wall in the back? Is that,
No, we're using they may decide to build a retaining wall, or in our case, we're actually just using the foundation itself as the retaining wall. And you're grading up the back side of the building. There is a retaining wall along the front side.
yeah.
This driveway is actually relatively flat, and the driveway that we were previously talking about on Lot 4 is actually an 8% grade. So it climbs 2 feet and 25 feet, which isn't a steep
In order
driveway.
to make that driveway flat, you have to take out a tremendous amount of soil.
Yeah, and again, we have about a 6-foot cut. When you get back behind the lot, it reduces down to, you're about another 6-foot cut behind in order to get that to a garage under.
Any further questions? Yes.
Chris Hilbert, 187 Central. Really just trying to understand a little bit more one of the statements that we made, which is, so I'm concerned with the topmost lot here along Central Street. I'm across from that, and you've mentioned that there's a town-maintained storm drain there. And one of the comments you made is that if there's an issue, it's going to be noticed by the town. My question or my concern is, I don't think there'll be an issue with the storm drain. That storm drain simply goes into a duct that goes across the road. On the other side, it goes into what I believe becomes private property again. I don't know how the town maintains that. From what I can see, it's not been maintained at all.
Doesn't get me.
And as you go further back from it, obviously not the concern of this group, but a concern to me if anything should additionally go in there. At the back recently, as I was purchasing my property before an opportunity to know that, the solar farm went in, and they did work to construct that road there. And there had been drainage issues. My understanding was that was due to a crushed pipe going across that road that was going to be repaired as part of the project. And I can see the new repair's been placed there. However, the placement of that pipe is at such a height that it actually doesn't drain virtually anything from that ditch. So if we were to add anything into that ditch, it's going to drain into my property, and it already has been to some degree with the crushed one, and certainly has continued. And I know it's not historically been that way because there's a well-established blueberry patch that you can see going back into the late 50s or early 60s, blueberries are not happy with wet feet. They're now rotting out. So to supply anything additional there would certainly make it worse on my property, and I'm not sure how the town, besides me complaining perhaps, would be aware, since it looks like that current drainage is not maintained, and that drainage is probably going to work fine until it gets to my property. So that would be my question: is how does that work? How does that?
There should be no additional water going
Right.
on.
Going there.
That was one of the-
Mr. Chairman, we've gone far afield from
Yes.
both the authority of this board, the responsibility of the applicant and their professional. We're off the project site.
Right.
So
But
okay,
that
let me
was one
refer
of
back
my,
to the
one of
project
the
site.
design points, was that corner, and that were not increasing at that corner from existing conditions to proposed. So again, they're not gonna
Okay.
make it better, but they are not increasing going to that.
To that drainage storm. Okay.
To that
'cause
drainage stop.
The wording I heard earlier sounded like it was an alternative path, particularly under the 100-year or other times.
No, it really, the majority of the runoff from the entire parcel is coming to this
All right.
point.
So as long as no additional is going there, that won't impact me further.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, what do we need done on this?
Well, besides some recommendations that we talked about, some specifics, my general recommendation to the commission that if all identified concerns have been addressed, which we've had a fairly robust and substantive discussion about various things, the commission may wish to consider voting to close the public hearing, contingent upon plan and document revisions being made within 14 days and proving acceptable to the RCC office, and directing the issuance of a stormwater management permit for multiple residential dwelling project with typical conditions and those recommendations made by the peer reviewer.
I would move that, as long as it's understood that any things that came up new tonight be included within those conditions as otherwise discussed. That does not include my comments. So I make that motion.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you, people. I hope we've addressed everything, and I don't know what else. You must be familiar with it.
What's that?
You must be familiar with it.
Yeah. Well, it's more interesting when it's someone else's property.
You're up on a hill there.
Email today. One across from us. Oh, yeah, well, we have drains fine in front of us.
What I didn't explain was that there's 3 designs.
I know what happens,
So there
the
was
perk system's
the one at the
improving over the
end
years.
was the.
Good to see you, Kurt.
Number 1. The other 2 are
Good to see you, Judy.
close to those 2 different points, the wetland or. Oh, that's good. Well, and
Having a driveway come down
and
and just
basically,
do a very slight
the
sort of
butters,
speed bump
they're,
to make
you know,
sure
if you
that it
see a
doesn't
lot of water
shoot.
coming out of those basins,
Is that something that could be implemented here rather easily, that might resolve this whole,
So,
this
that's
whole
kind of
business?
design.
And I can talk to the client too, so potentially for the trench drains.
Obviously,
Not
no.
like trench drains, because they require.
Get a lot of maintenance.
And especially with the town standing in the road, and also make case that the town helps you climb up your trench.
But we've sometimes done just kind of a slow, gradual mound. It usually doesn't prove to be a problem in getting the pickup truck plowing the driveway or whatever. But it's enough that it encourages the water to go off to either side.
The other thing that you could do is you could put in one of those driveway grates.
Well, we were just talking about that, and there's a
But those freeze up around here.
and there's a
I put bunch of
maintenance.
them in. They
Yeah,
don't
there's
work.
a
Well,
maintenance.
the other issue is most of them, when they're down by the street like that, they end up, within a few years, they just fall.
Yeah, well, if it's sand and everything.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to our 8 o'clock item.
Very thorough.
But this is going on.
Now, can I read the 8?
You can read, you can
8:15.
read the 8 and the 8:15, and I will hand you the email requesting the continuance, and you can read that.
8 o'clock is a continued notice of intent for the application DEP number 63-0669 on land of Weathersfield Street, map 11, parcels 54, 54-1, 58, 599, 607, 615, 623 on Weathersfield Street, map 11, parcel lot 53, 58, 58-2, 58-2A, and land off of Pine Needle Lane, Georgetown, map 11, parcel lot 56, Raul LLC, Marvin Revocable Trust, proposed construction for an 11.25 acre solar photovoltaic system, gravel access drive, stormwater facilities, utilities associated with grading within a 100-foot buffer zone for bordering vegetated wetlands and isolated vegetated wetlands. And can I include it in a...
Just say
And then same
stormwater
address,
management permit for the same parcels.
Stormwater management for the above previous noted items, which was the 815. And we have received a message from them that please consider this email as a request to continue the public hearing for our project to June 19th. We have taken note of the submittal deadline of June 4th for the June 19th hearing. Thank you, Robert B. Blanchett, Jr., W.C. Camet Engineering, Inc., 279 Elm Street, Aintree, Mass. So they would like to continue it to June 19th. Do I hear such a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Oh, but before we get, I want to remember to get signatures for
Yes.
the permit that we just issued.
Yes.
Stormwater. And we'll mark that one out. Down there. So.
I believe I did not sign that.
Correct. You were recused. And so part of your recusal, we take the pen away from you. Okay, I believe the next item is our certificate of compliance request, is it not?
The new certificate of compliance request, DEP number 63-0479 for 33 Emily Lane, map 9, parcel 23, lots 26 and 27, Daniel Davison.
So, what we're doing here, the recommendation is we are closing off the old expired order of conditions, which they forgot to request a certificate of compliance declaring that it's invalid, so I would recommend that the commission issue a certificate of compliance declaring the order lapsed, expired, and that no work on the site commenced, which I can testify to, although the new order of conditions, they have started work under the new order.
Do I hear such a motion? Second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Is there anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I have no further business.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.